Midnight Hong Kong time, and the protesters who'd forced the cancellation of all outbound flights for the second day running, fortifying their positions with baggage trolleys, became suddenly agitated as a thin blue line tentatively entered the arrivals hall Terminal 1. Laser pens blinded the officers, who were immediately forced to retreat. The Hong Kong police had said they'd been considering the use of force. Continued disruption on this scale in an airport which handled 75 million passengers last year would prove just too costly. The initial police posse withdrew. Apparently they'd been trying to extract a man who the police claim is a tourist, but the protesters suspect is a plant, possibly a cop undercover. The black shirts thought for a moment they'd seen the police off. Then the riot police arrived. Initially they picked off individuals. Some were beaten, then cuffed and marched off. One riot policeman became immediately trapped inside the doors to the terminal. You see him attempting an arrest, then he's set upon. He loses, then is beaten with his own baton. The intensity of the mistrust and hatred that is built up exploding. The cop pulls a handgun, but shows restraint. He does not fire. He's finally rescued. There's a standoff at the doors to the terminal, a baggage cart blockade, and a manager in a suit seemingly trying to keep the peace. Beijing's shrill rhetoric of no leniency, no mercy, still reverberating around Hong Kong, a city in the throes of chaos and escalating violence, and now gripped by fear of what China might do. At 20 to 1 in the morning, the protesters surround another suspected police spy and cuff him with plastic cable ties. A few minutes later, in front of the cameras of scores of journalists, they immobilized him, strapping him to a baggage trolley, before somehow he ended up on the floor, where he was brutally kicked and beaten. The editor of a Chinese Communist Party paper, the English-language Global Times, tweeted just over an hour ago that Fu Guohao is one of his Hong Kong-based reporters. There is an ugly symmetry to all this. What had infuriated the anti-Beijing protesters was the arrest of one of theirs by a policeman posing as a black shirt, complete with a yellow hard hat, the rebel street fighter's uniform. It was a messy and bloody arrest, and it had followed other violent incidents on Sunday, in which Hong Kong police fired tear gas into underground stations, chased and beat fleeing protesters, and, across the harbour, shot a young female protester in the eye with a baton round. The sudden spike of violence had brought the staff at 13 Hong Kong hospitals out in protest today. The image of the young woman with her bloodied eye, now a symbol of what demonstrators brand police brutality. This A&E staffer said only Carrie Lam can end the violence. And Carrie Lam, the pro-Beijing political leader of the semi-autonomous territory, held a news conference this morning. Her legitimacy questioned, her authority diminished. She was grilled by reporters and accused of dodging their questions.
The police have had a very difficult time in the last 2 months to enforce the law and to ensure law and order in Hong Kong. Hong
Kong has become unsafe and unstable, she continued in Cantonese. Violence, no matter who commits it, is pushing Hong Kong onto a road of no return. At the top of the road of no return, over the border in Shenzhen, just inside mainland China, battalions of People's Armed Police now stand at the ready. This is China's counter-terrorism force, and tellingly, the protests in Hong Kong were yesterday described by Beijing as emerging terrorism. Hong Kongers watch anxiously as Carrie Lam sticks to her guns. They know it's Big Brother Beijing who's calling the shots.
Jonathan Miller reporting there. Now, an interim trade deal between the US and the UK, which could take effect on the 1st of November, and a declaration to be signed at the G7 by President Trump and the Prime Minister. That is what was discussed today during one of many meetings US National Security Advisor John Bolton has had while in London. Meeting with International Trade Secretary Liz Truss, he also outlined the US commitment to support Britain through the Brexit process. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, has more on his two-day tour of Whitehall and why he's here.
John Bolton met the Chancellor this afternoon on his second day of striding around Westminster with the message the US supports Brexit on October the 31st. Good news then for the Prime Minister, who discussed a trade deal with President Trump's national security advisor.
In my experience, the Americans are very tough negotiators indeed, and we will do a great deal with them, and it will open up our opportunities for UK businesses and particularly services companies in the US. But yes, it will be a tough old haggle, but we'll get there.
Today he also met the International Trade Secretary Liz Truss. But the US administration's enthusiasm for Brexit isn't just about trade. It's about hostility to the European Union.
This originates in an ideological position against the European Union and a feeling that the European Union enhances the power of European states against the United States. It's very short-sighted. It does not originate from a place of friendship for Great Britain. As China and India have become stronger, as the United States has become weaker in the world compared to the rise of these new powers, President Trump and some of those around him, like John Bolton, have become more resentful of the power of Europe, not as a force multiplier for the West, but as a way that makes the United States less dominant within its coalition. And so they've wanted to break it apart.
President Trump has made that quite clear.
Well, I think we have a lot of foes. I think the European Union is a foe, what they do to us in trade. Now, you wouldn't think of the European Union, but they're a foe.
Importing US chlorinated chicken has become shorthand for the potential lowering of health standards in any trade deal with the US. Mr. Bolton suggested that any agreement could be done sector by sector, which would reduce British leverage. But the government's own calculations suggest that a comprehensive deal with America would only raise GDP by a maximum of 0.3%. Mr. Bolton, who was an architect of the 2003 war in Iraq, used to be US ambassador to the United Nations, which he despises, as he opposes all multilateral organizations, believing they constrain US power. He's also associated with a hawkish position on Iran. Before he took office in this administration, he was a paid speaker for the Mujahideen al-Khalq, a cult that wants to overthrow the government in Tehran.
The declared policy of the United States should be regime change in Iran.
He wants Britain to follow the US and abandon contracts with the Chinese telecoms company Huawei, seeing it as a security risk. But he wasn't here to pressure the UK on such issues. He was in London to celebrate the weakening of the European Union as Britain pulls out.
Well, joining me now from the US is Ambassador Wendy Sherman, who was Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs in the Obama administration and is now Director of the Center for Public Leadership at the Kennedy School at Harvard University. John Bolton is not known for striking trade deals. What do you think he's up to?
Oh, I think he's up to quite a bit of theater to try to increase the political strength of Boris Johnson in hopes that Johnson will be an ally with the Trump policy, not only towards Iran, but toward Israel, the Middle East in general, and the Trump administration's approach to the European Union, which you have quite accurately pegged as one of great hostility. So I think there is a lot of choreography going on here, and Mr. Bolton is hoping to tie back the relationship with the United Kingdom and away from the European Union.
Are sort of sector-by-sector trade deals possible? I mean, are they legal under the WTO?
One can do sector-by-sector deals. But if indeed we're talking about a comprehensive deal, which the Prime Minister has said that he wants, that does come under WTO rules, will be quite difficult to make happen for two reasons. One, the European Union can't be disadvantaged with a greater U.S. access by the UK. and it will have to go through the U.S. Congress. Even sectoral agreements, if their tariff increases, have to be approved, or tariff changes have to be approved by the United States Congress. And although the Congress has given President fast-track authority, which means the Congress can take an up and down vote without amendments, nonetheless, there are only so many small agreements they're going to consider, and not many days left in this session. And the new session, which will come into place in January, will be completely ruled by where our presidential election appears to be headed.
I mean, the Democrats have also made clear that they won't approve any trade deals if the Brexit that happens, if it happens, threatens the Good Friday peace agreement. That's going to be something that's quite hard to judge, isn't it?
I think that will be hard to judge, but there are long-standing relationships between Americans and those who put together the Good Friday Agreement, and ongoing leaders in the region. And I think the Democrats will look at this with great care. Democrats have not been enthusiastic at all about a no-deal Brexit. They understand that the UK gets to make its own decisions in terms of what's good for its economy and its national security. But nonetheless, there are consequences to those choices. And as trade deals go, the Democrats are very concerned about what those trade deals look like. And one other point I should have made earlier, the U.S. agriculture market is incredibly strong, much stronger than the British market. And I can't imagine that agriculture won't play a quite difficult place in any trade negotiations that go on.
So would this be hugely liberating for Britain, or a bit of a threat?
I think it's some of both, and it depends on how the Trump administration plays it. And I think very concerning here is what it means in terms of whether the Trump administration is going to try to use trade enticements as a way to get agreements on major national security issues. You mentioned in the report leading up to my being on the Iran deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and the UK has stood with France and Germany up until now to keep that deal in place in spite of the Trump administration withdrawal. I don't think Prime Minister is looking forward to war with Iran, but John Bolton has never seen a war he didn't want to wage, and I would say that is true in the case of Iran. And so we'll see whether the U.S. and the U.K. can stay as one, or whether, in fact, they must depart company.